I was 22 years old, 3 months off my training, when I decided to stop a wire transfer I had no authority to stop. And it is the best thing I have ever done, and I would do it again tomorrow without blinking. Let me back up, because you need to know the man first, or none of the rest of it will land the way it should. I work at a small bank branch in a small Indiana town, the kind of branch with 3 teller windows and a lobby that smells like carpet cleaner and free coffee, where the same 40 or 50 regulars come in every week, and you learn their names and their grandkids' names and which candy they want from the bowl, even though they're 70 years old, and pretend it's for somebody else. It is not a glamorous job. People think a bank teller just counts money. What a bank teller actually does, in a town like mine, is stand at a window and become a small fixed point in a lot of people's weeks. And after a while you realize that for some of them, the lonely ones, you might be the only person who says their name out loud that whole day. Mr. Halloran was one of those. He was 81 years old, and he had been banking at that branch since before I was born. Since before my mother was born, probably. Back when it was a different bank with a different name on the door. He came in every Friday in a pressed shirt, because he was of the generation that dresses up to handle money. And he always had a joke, usually a bad one, usually the same one, and he always took a butterscotch from the candy bowl and pretended he was taking it for his neighbor. His wife had been named Margaret, Marge, and she had passed 4 years before, and he still said her name in the present tense sometimes, and then caught himself. And every time he did it, something in my chest folded up like a paper crane. He grew tomatoes. That mattered more than I understood at the time. Every August he'd bring in a paper grocery sack of them, warm from his garden, and set them on the counter and make all 3 of us tellers take some. And they were the best tomatoes I have ever eaten in my life. And he knew it, and it was the proudest thing about him. A man who has lost his wife and buried most of his friends, and still gets up every morning to tie up tomato plants, is a man who has decided, against a great deal of evidence, that the world is still worth feeding. I loved him. I want to be honest about that. Before any of this happened, I already loved that old man, the plain, uncomplicated way you love the good regulars. And that love is the reason I noticed. Because here's the thing about a scam that hunts old people. It doesn't look like a crime while it's happening. It looks like a confused customer, and a busy Friday, and a wire transfer that's technically none of your business. That's what makes it work. That's what the people who do it are counting on. That everyone in the room will be too polite, too rushed, or too rule-bound to ask the one rude question that breaks the spell. The first wire I didn't think much about. It was the first Friday of July, and Mr. Halloran came to my window and asked to send a wire transfer, $9,000, to an account he read to me off a folded piece of paper in shaky block handwriting. I asked, the way we're trained to, what it was for, and he said, brightly, too brightly, that it was for some computer work, some tech support, that his computer had gotten a virus, and these nice people were fixing it. And I remember thinking that $9,000 was an awful lot for computer work. But he was cheerful and certain, and it was his money, and who was I, 22 and 3 months off training, to tell an 81-year-old man he couldn't spend his own money on his own computer? So I sent it. I have thought about that first wire more times than I can count. The second one was the very next Friday. Different account number, same story, the computer, the tech support, the nice people. This time he wasn't cheerful. This time his hand was shaking harder than usual as he slid the paper across. And he kept glancing at his phone, which was sitting face up on my counter with a call running, the timer ticking up in green, and I could hear, very faintly, a man's voice coming out of it. A fast voice. A talking the whole time voice. I asked again what it was for. And Mr. Halloran gave me the same answer. but he gave it to me like a man reciting something, like a kid who's been told what to say if the teacher asks. And the voice on the phone said something, and he flinched. I sent that one too. God help me, I sent that one too. Because I was young, and it wasn't in my training yet to understand what I was looking at. But it started to itch. Something had started to itch. The third Friday, I almost said something. He came in tired, grayer than I'd ever seen him. And the phone was face up on the counter again, with the green timer running. And when I asked him what the wire was for, he got, for the first time in all the Fridays I'd known him, short with me. He said, a little sharp, that it was his business, and he needed it done quickly. And the man's voice on the phone said something low, and Mr. Halloran's eyes went to the phone, and then back to me, apologetic and scared underneath the sharpness. It broke my heart, and I lost my nerve, and I sent it, and I hated myself in a small, quiet way for the rest of that shift. That was 3 wires now. $27,000 of an old man's life, gone out my window to strangers. And I had waved every dollar of it goodbye. The fourth one, I went and found my branch manager first. Her name was Lorraine, and she had been doing this for 30 years, and she was the person who had actually taught me, in a backroom session most people forget the second it's over, what elder financial exploitation looks like. I hadn't remembered the training. I'd remembered her. I went and found her at her desk, and I said, Lorraine, Mr. Halloran's sending another wire for computer stuff. That's the 4th one this month. And he's got somebody on the phone talking in his ear the whole time, and I don't like it. And Lorraine's face did a thing I will never forget. It went very still and very awake at the same time. The face of a person who has seen this exact movie before and knows how it ends if nobody stops the reel. She said, How much? I said, 9,000, same as the others. She said, And there's a live call running while he's at the window? I said, Yes. And she stood up from her desk and said, very quietly, That's not computer support, honey. That's a script. Somebody is on that phone right now telling him what to say to us, and he's been coached to lie to you, not because he's a liar, but because they've frightened him into it. And I felt the floor drop out of my stomach, because when she said it out loud, I heard the second wire again in my memory, the reciting voice, the flinch, and I understood that I had already helped them 3 times. Now here is the part where I want to be fair to myself and to every teller and every family member who has ever missed this, because the shame of missing it is its own trap. You miss it because it is designed to be missed. The people who run these things are not amateurs. They are organized, they are patient, and they are very, very good at the psychology of it. They find a lonely older person, often through a pop-up on a computer or a phone call about a refund, and they get them on the line, and they stay on the line, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days across many calls. And they build a little bubble of urgency and secrecy around their victim, where the scammer is the only trustworthy voice, and everyone else, the bank, the family, the teller who loves him, becomes a threat to be managed. They tell them not to tell anyone. They tell them the bank will try to stop them because the bank doesn't understand. They turn the victim's own decency and trust into the leash. So Mr. Halloran wasn't being foolish. He was being farmed. And on that 4th Friday, standing at Lorraine's desk with my heart going like a rabbit, I made the decision that this was the last wire that was ever going to leave that branch for those people. Whatever I had to do, whatever rule I had to bend, whoever got mad at me. Lorraine taught me something in the next 10 minutes that they don't put in any training manual, which is that you cannot save a person like Mr. Halloran by embarrassing him. If we marched up and told him, loud, in the lobby, that he was being scammed and we weren't sending his money, he would have felt like a fool in front of the whole branch. And a scared, ashamed old man does not think clearly. He digs in. And worse, he goes home and calls the only voice that has been kind to him about it, which is the scammer, who is very ready with an explanation for why the bank is being difficult. You don't win him back by making him wrong. You win him back by getting him, gently, out of the bubble, and giving him room to see it himself. So Lorraine didn't touch the wire, and she didn't argue about it. She came out to my window with her reading glasses on and her calmest voice, and she said, "Mr. Halloran, how are those tomatoes coming?" And his face changed a little, because that was a Mr. Halloran question, and not a bank question. And she said, "Listen, we've got a little flag on this transfer type today. Nothing to worry about. Some computer thing on our end. Would you come sit in my office a minute while I sort it out? I've got the good coffee back there, not the lobby stuff." And she said, "Easy as anything. You can leave your phone here at the window. We'll only be a minute." And that was the whole trick, right there, that last sentence. Because the phone was the leash, and she was quietly cutting it. He hesitated. The voice on the phone said something, urgent now. I could hear the pitch of it change. But an 81-year-old man who has been standing at a counter for 20 minutes being talked at is tired. And the offer of a chair and good coffee from a woman who knows his tomatoes is a powerful thing. And he set the phone down on my counter, face up, the call still running, and he followed Lorraine back to her office. I have never in my life wanted to pick up a telephone and say something unkind to a stranger as badly as I wanted to in that moment, listening to that little tinny voice keep talking to an empty counter. I didn't. I just turned it face down and let it talk to the wood. What happened in Lorraine's office, I mostly got secondhand, but I got it from Mr. Halloran himself later when he could talk about it. Lorraine didn't ambush him. She poured the coffee, and she asked him, plainly and kindly, to walk her through what the computer people had told him from the beginning. And just in the telling of it out loud to a person who wasn't rushing him, some of it started to come apart in his own ears. He told her it had started with a message on his computer screen, a warning, a phone number to call because his machine was infected and his bank accounts were exposed. He'd called. A nice young man had helped him, had shown him alarming things on his own screen, and had explained that criminals were trying to drain his accounts, and that the only way to keep his life savings safe was to move it, wire by wire, into what the young man called a protected holding account, while the bank's security team, meaning them, meaning the scammers, sorted it all out. You have to understand how backwards and perfect that is. They had convinced a careful, decent man that emptying his savings to strangers was the way to protect it from strangers. They had made him afraid of exactly the wrong people. Every wire he sent to save his money was the theft itself. And he'd been so frightened of the invisible criminals the nice young man kept describing that he'd stopped being able to see the actual criminal, who was the nice young man. Lorraine let him get most of the way there on his own, and then she told him the rest, gently, the way you tell someone bad news you're sure of. She said, "Mr. Halloran, there is no security team, and there is no protected account, and the young man on the phone is the criminal. There was never a virus. The money you've been sending to keep it safe is the money they were stealing." and she told me his face didn't crumble the way you'd think. It went very still first, the way a man's face goes when a thing he's been holding off finally arrives. And then he asked her one question in a voice that just about finished me when she repeated it to me later. He asked, "How much?" And when she told him, $27,000 across 3 wires and a 4th one sitting stopped at my window, he put his big gardener's hands flat on her desk and he said, so quiet, "That was Margaret's too. That was our whole life." Here is where the story turns, and where I want you to know that a small-town bank branch on an ordinary Friday is not powerless against these people. Because for a long time I thought it was, and it is not. Lorraine had already, before she ever poured that coffee, started the things that had to be started. She had put a hold on the 4th wire so it never left the building. She had flagged his accounts. And the moment she had his understanding and his consent, she moved, fast, because with wire fraud, the clock is everything. Every hour, the money sits a little further out of reach. She had the bank submit recall requests on the 3 wires that had already gone, which is the formal way one bank asks another to freeze and return money that was sent through fraud. She filed the bank's suspected elder financial exploitation report, which is a real thing that banks are trained and in many cases required to do. She contacted Adult Protective Services, the county agency whose whole job is looking out for older folks being harmed or exploited, so that someone official and kind would follow up and make sure he was safe and supported and not about to get hunted all over again the next week. And she asked Mr. Halloran, gently, whether there was family she could call. And there was. A son, 2 states away, who had no idea any of this was happening, and who was in his car and driving through the night within the hour. They also reported the whole thing to the places that keep the bigger score, the online crime complaint center the FBI runs, and the Federal Trade Commission, with every detail Mr. Halloran could give. The account numbers he'd wired to, the phone number that had been talking in his ear for a month, the script the young man used. At the time, it felt almost pointless to me, like dropping a message in a bottle. It was not pointless. I'll get to that. The phone, by the way, kept ringing, all afternoon. Once he was in Lorraine's office and the money had stopped moving, the nice young man stopped being nice. He called back and called back, and when Mr. Halloran finally answered on speaker with Lorraine beside him, the voice was a different voice, hard and fast and threatening, telling him he'd ruined everything, that now the criminals would surely take his house, that he had to send the money right now. And you know what? That was the thing that burned the last of the fog off. Hearing that kindly helper turn into a snarling stranger the second the money stopped. Mr. Halloran looked at Lorraine and he said, "Well, he surely doesn't sound like he's protecting me anymore, does he?" And he hung up, and he blocked the number, and he never spoke to them again. Not all of the money came home. I want to be honest about that, because I hate stories that tie it up too neat. The very first wire, the cheerful one from the first Friday, the one I'd sent without a second thought, was long gone, pulled out and scattered through the kind of accounts these rings use to launder it before anyone can blink. $9,000 of Margaret's life that we never got back, and I carried that one personally for a long time. But the 2 most recent wires, the reciting one and the sharp-tempered one, had landed in accounts that the receiving bank was able to freeze in time, because we'd moved fast, and because Lorraine knew exactly which levers to pull. And over the following weeks, both of those were clawed back and returned to his account. $18,000. Home. And the 4th wire, the one sitting stopped at my window when I went to Lorraine, That one never left at all. $27,000 saved out of 36. It should have been all of it. It could so easily have been none of it. His son came and stayed a week, and they set his accounts up the right way, with the son as a trusted contact the bank could call if anything looked wrong, and alerts on large transfers, all the quiet guardrails that a lonely man living alone hadn't known to ask for. Adult Protective Services checked in on him more than once and connected him with a few things, and I think, honestly, some of what they gave him was just the message that he wasn't stupid and he wasn't alone, which is medicine that scam victims need as badly as they need their money back. Because the shame is the worst part. The shame is the thing that keeps people from telling anyone, and the silence is exactly what the next ring is counting on. It took Mr. Halloran a while to be able to look at me. That was the hardest part for me, harder than the lost 9,000. For a few weeks he came in on Fridays and did his banking with whoever's window was open that wasn't mine. And he didn't take a butterscotch. And he didn't tell his joke. And I understood, I did, that I was a witness to the worst day of his pride, and it hurt him to stand in front of me. I never pushed. I just kept being at my window, kind and ordinary, so that when he was ready, the door would be open. And one Friday in the fall, he came to my window on purpose. He stood there a second, and he took a butterscotch out of the bowl, and he said it was for his neighbor, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "Young lady, I have been trying to find the words to thank you, and I can't. So I'm just going to say that you saw me when I couldn't see myself, and I won't forget it. And I came around that counter, which you are definitely not supposed to do, and I hugged that old man in the middle of the lobby, and Lorraine at her desk pretended very hard to be reading something." Here is what happened next, the part I promised you I'd get back to. About 5 months later, Lorraine got a call, and then I got to hear about it, from an investigator with a federal task force. That message in a bottle we'd sent, the account numbers and the phone number and the script, had not floated off into nothing. It had joined a file. It turned out there was already a federal case being built against the ring that had been running exactly this scam across a dozen states. And the details from Mr. Halloran's case, the specific accounts, that specific phone number, slotted right into the evidence they were assembling. Our small-town Friday afternoon became one dated, documented, corroborating piece of a case much bigger than us. We never got to know all of how it came out. Those things move slow and quiet. But that phone number, that had lived in an old man's ear for a month, is in a federal file now, with his name on the report as one of the people they hurt and one of the people who helped stop them. He liked that. He liked being on the right side of a file. And every August since, the tomatoes come. Bigger sacks than ever, like he's got something to prove to the soil, and he makes all the tellers take some the way he always did. But there's a second bag now, every year, set aside, with my name written on it, in that shaky block handwriting I first saw on a folded scrap headed for a stranger's account. Just for me. And every year there's a tomato on top of that bag that he swears is the best one of the whole crop, the prize one. And every year I eat it, standing right there at my window, still warm from his garden and his hands. And every year it is, I promise you, the best thing I have ever tasted. I think about how close it was. I think about how easily I could have sent that fourth wire, too rushed or too polite or too worried about bending a rule, and how he'd have gone home and sent the fifth and the sixth, until there was nothing left, and lost the house, and never told a soul because of the shame. The whole thing turned on one young teller deciding that a rude question was an act of love. That's really all it was. I asked the rude question. I refused to be too polite to notice. So here's what I want to leave you with, and it's less a question than a favor. If you have an older person in your life, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor who dresses up to go to the bank, call them this week. And don't just ask how they are. Ask them if anybody's called them lately about their computer, or a refund, or a problem with their account. Ask the rude question. Ask it kindly. Ask it like Lorraine asked about the tomatoes. But ask it. Because the people who do this are betting their whole business on the idea that nobody in that old person's life will care enough to ask. Prove them wrong. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments, honestly. Have you seen this one up close, in your own family, at your own job? Did you catch it in time? Or did it get somebody you love before anyone knew to look? Tell me about it, because the more of us say it out loud, the less power the silence has. And tell me where you're listening from and how old you are, because I picture all of you out there, and I hope some of you are picturing an old man with a garden full of tomatoes, still here, still planting, because somebody asked the rude question in time. If this one meant something to you, give it a like so it finds the person who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you'd like to sit with me for another. Go call your people. I mean it.